The front door slammed with such force that the family photos rattled on the walls. I gripped my swollen belly, feeling my daughter kick in protest at the sudden noise. My mother-in-law, Evelyn, stood before me like a sentinel, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at the car keys on the counter. "Get them," she said. "The grocery store closes in 30 minutes. I can't drive in this storm." I glanced at the window where rain pelted against the glass. "It's not safe, especially not in my condition." "Your condition?" She spat the words like they were poison. "Pregnancy isn't a disability, Paisley. When I was carrying Connor, I worked right up until my water broke. My name is Paisley, and at 9 months pregnant, I'd learned to pick my battles with Evelyn Mitchell. But this wasn't about pride or principle. This was about my baby's safety. I'll order groceries online," I offered, trying to keep my voice steady. "They'll deliver tomorrow morning?" "Absolutely not. I need fresh produce for my bridge club tomorrow. Besides, a little rain never killed anyone." Lightning crackled outside, illuminating her face in harsh shadows. The thunder that followed made me jump. "A little rain?" I gestured toward the window. "There's a severe weather warning in effect." Evelyn's lips curved into that familiar smile, the one that never reached her eyes. "If you can't handle simple household responsibilities, perhaps Connor and I were right to be concerned about your ability to manage motherhood." The words hit harder than the thunder. Connor and I? My husband and I hadn't discussed any concerns about my parenting abilities. But then again, we hardly discussed anything these days. Not since Evelyn had moved in 3 months ago after her temporary housing crisis. I said no. My voice came out stronger than I expected. She stepped closer, her designer perfume suffocating me. "Then I'll call Connor at work. I'm sure he'd love to hear how his wife refuses to help his mother with a simple errand." My phone buzzed in my pocket. Probably Connor's nightly check-in. I didn't reach for it. Instead, I watched Evelyn's face, noting how her confidence wavered slightly at my silence. "Go ahead," I said. "Call him." She reached for her phone, but before she could dial, headlights swept across the living room walls. A car door slammed outside. "He's home early," I said, relief flooding through me. Evelyn's expression shifted so quickly it was almost comical. From righteous anger to concerned mother in the blink of an eye. She hurried to the front door, throwing it open. "Connor, you're soaked. What are you doing home in this weather?" My husband stepped inside, water dripping from his coat. His eyes found mine first, then moved to his mother, then back to me. "The office lost power, so they send everyone home. What's going on here?" "Nothing," Evelyn said quickly. "Paisley and I were just discussing dinner plans." "Really?" Connor's gaze settled on the car keys still on the counter. "Because I could hear you both from the driveway." The silence that followed was deafening. I placed both hands on my belly, feeling our daughter move beneath them. She was active tonight, as if she too sensed the tension in the room. "Your wife," Evelyn began, her voice trembling slightly, "refuses to help me prepare for tomorrow's bridge club. I only asked her to make a quick trip to the store." Connor looked at me, then at the storm raging outside. Something flickered across his face. Doubt, maybe? Or recognition? For the first time since his mother moved in, I saw him truly seeing the situation. "Mom," he said slowly, "you can't be serious. No one should be driving in this weather, especially not Paisley." "But my bridge club can wait," he finished firmly. "Or better yet, can meet somewhere else tomorrow." I watched Evelyn's face crumple, then harden. She turned away, heading for the stairs. "Fine, I see how it is. My own son, choosing his wife over his mother's needs. How quickly they forget who raised them." After she disappeared upstairs, Connor turned to me. "Has this been happening often?" I opened my mouth to answer, but the words wouldn't come. "How do you tell your husband that his mother has been slowly trying to break you? That every day brings a new test, a new way to prove your inadequacy?" Instead, I simply nodded and watched as my husband's world began to crack. 3 months ago, I stood in this same kitchen watching Connor help his mother unpack her dishes. "Just until the renovation's done," he'd promised, kissing my forehead. 2 weeks, tops. Now those dishes had replaced mine in the cabinets, and Evelyn's presence had seeped into every corner of our home like a slow-spreading poison. I sat at the breakfast table the morning after the storm, watching Connor make coffee. He hadn't mentioned last night's confrontation, but tension hung thick in the air between us. Your mother's bridge club meeting got canceled, I said, testing the waters. He kept his back to me, measuring coffee grounds. Good, it wasn't safe for anyone to drive anyway. When are we going to talk about it? The measuring spoon clattered against the counter. About what, exactly? About the fact that your 2-week house guest is still here after 3 months? About how she's trying to drive me crazy? About how you see it now but pretend you don't? He turned, his face tight. She's my mother, Paisley. And I'm your wife, your pregnant wife. Footsteps on the stairs silenced us both. Evelyn appeared in her silk robe, perfectly coiffed despite the early hour. Good morning, darling, she said to Connor, then barely nodded in my direction. I hope you don't mind, but I've invited the bridge club here for next week instead. The renovation crew called. Apparently there's been another delay at my house. My hands clenched under the table. Another delay. Of course. Connor frowned. What kind of delay? Oh, you know how these things go. Permits and inspections and whatnot. She waved her hand dismissively. Could be another month or two. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped against the floor. I need to check something. In our home office, I pulled up the city's building permit website. My hands shook as I typed in Evelyn's address. The search results loaded. No active permits, no pending applications, no renovations. I pressed print, the evidence of her lie emerging in crisp black and white. As I reached for the paper, a shadow fell across the desk. Snooping, dear? Evelyn's voice was honey-sweet poison. I turned, holding the paper against my chest. There are no renovations, are there? There never were. She stepped closer, dropping her sugary facade. Connor needs me here. He always has. You're just temporary. A vessel for my grandchild. Once that baby comes, he'll see what a mess you are. Who do you think he'll turn to then? You're wrong about him. Am I? Who's he chosen every time you've complained about me? Who's he defending right now in that kitchen? She smiled, reaching out to pat my cheek. I jerked away. Poor Paisley, so naive, so unstable. These pregnancy hormones are really affecting your judgment, aren't they? The paper crumpled in my grip. Get out of my house. Your house? She laughed. I raised Connor in a house just like this one. I taught him everything he knows about family, about loyalty. You're just renting space in his life, dear. I'm permanent. I pushed past her, my heart pounding. In the kitchen, Connor was still making coffee, oblivious to the war being waged under his roof. Connor, I said, my voice shaking. We need to talk about your mother's renovation. Not now, Paisley. I'm already late for work. There is no renovation. I thrust the paper toward him. Look at the permit website. She lied. She's been lying this whole time. He glanced at the paper, then at his mother who had followed me into the kitchen. Mom? Oh, sweetheart. Evelyn's eyes welled with tears. I didn't want to worry you. The truth is, I've been struggling since your father died. The house, it's in foreclosure. I was too ashamed to tell you. Connor's face softened with sympathy. I watched in horror as he moved to embrace her. Why didn't you just tell me? He asked. I didn't want to be a burden. She sobbed into his shoulder, but her eyes met mine over it, triumphant, calculating. You and Paisley have so much going on with the baby coming. I thought I could handle it myself. I stood there clutching the useless paper, watching my husband comfort the woman who was systematically destroying our marriage. In that moment, I knew. If I wanted to save my family, I needed proof. Real proof. And I knew exactly how to get it. I reached for my phone and started recording. The recording started small. Evelyn muttering threats when Connor wasn't around, snide comments about my parenting abilities, little digs about my weight, my clothes, my cooking. But today's recording was different. Today I caught something that made my blood run cold. I sat in my car outside the bank, replaying the conversation I'd overheard between Evelyn and someone named James. The foreclosure notice was perfect, she'd said, laughing. Connor actually believed it. Now I just need to convince him to add me to the house deed. For security purposes, of course. The boy's always been easy to manipulate. My hands trembled as I pressed stop. The weight of her deception crushed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. This wasn't just about controlling our lives anymore. She was trying to steal our home. I dialed Connor's number, but it went straight to voicemail. Of course, he was in court today, defending some corporate client while his mother plotted to take everything we'd built. A tap on my window made me jump. Evelyn stood there, smiling that serpentine smile. I lowered the window an inch. "Fancy meeting you here," she said. "Following me now, dear?" "I had a doctor's appointment." The lie came easily. "What are you doing at the bank?" "Oh, just some financial planning. Connor and I were discussing adding my name to some documents for estate purposes." She leaned closer to the window. "You understand, don't you? Family has to protect family." "Is that what you told James?" Her smile flickered for just a moment. "I don't know any James." "Really? Because I heard you talking to him this morning about the foreclosure scam?" The mask dropped completely. "Careful, Paisley. Pregnancy can make women unstable, paranoid even. It would be a shame if Connor had to worry about your mental state so close to the delivery." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm concerned about you, dear. All these wild accusations, this erratic behavior. What kind of grandmother would I be if I didn't speak up?" I started the car. "I need to go." "Of course." She stepped back, the pleasant mask back in place. "Oh, and Paisley, I took the liberty of calling Dr. Reynolds about your concerns. He agreed that some additional psychiatric evaluation might be helpful, for the baby's sake." My doctor. She'd gotten to my doctor. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. When I walked inside, Connor was there, home early again. The look on his face stopped me cold. "Mom told me you were following her today," he said. "She's worried about you. I'm worried about you." "Connor, listen." Dr. Reynolds called. He held up his hand. "He thinks you might be experiencing prenatal anxiety. He recommended a specialist." "Your mother got to him first, didn't she? She's setting this up, can't you see?" "Setting what up? She's trying to help." I pulled out my phone. "Listen to this, please." But before I could play the recording, Evelyn appeared on the stairs. "Oh, good, you're both here. Connor, darling, did you tell her about the appointment I scheduled with Dr. Chen? She's excellent with prenatal anxiety cases." "I'm not going to any doctor you choose," I said. "This ends now." "Paisley," Connor's voice was gentle, patronizing. "You're not thinking clearly." "Not thinking clearly?" I laughed, the sound sharp and foreign. "Your mother is trying to steal our house. She's manipulating you, lying about the foreclosure, trying to get on the deed. I have proof." "That's enough," Connor shouted. The force of it made me step back. "Mom's right. You need help." I looked between them. My husband, the man I loved, standing next to the woman who was systematically destroying our lives. In that moment, I knew I needed help, but not the kind they were suggesting. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Margaret Nolan, Evelyn's oldest friend, the only person who might know enough about her past to help me expose the truth. As I pressed dial, Evelyn's face changed. For the first time since she'd moved in, I saw real fear in her eyes. "Good." Margaret's voice crackled through my phone speaker. "I always knew this day would come." She paused, the silence heavy with unspoken history. "Meet me at the Cedar Grove Cafe tomorrow at 10. Come alone." I glanced at the closed guest room door where Evelyn had retreated after my phone call. The house felt like a minefield, every step potentially triggering another explosion. Connor hadn't spoken to me since our argument, choosing instead to sleep in his home office. The baby kicked, a sharp reminder of everything at stake. I pressed my hand against my belly, whispering, "I promise I'll fix this before you arrive." Morning came with the sound of hushed voices downstairs. I crept to the stairwell, staying out of sight. "The psychiatric hold is just temporary," Evelyn was saying. "Once the baby comes, we can evaluate if she's fit for custody." "Mom, that seems extreme." "Connor, she's delusional. Following me, making accusations, recording conversations. What happens when she's alone with the baby?" My heart stopped. A psychiatric hold? They were planning to take my baby? "I'll think about it," Connor said, his voice uncertain. I retreated silently, my mind racing. The cafe was 15 minutes away. I had to get there without them following me. I grabbed my phone, keys, and the USB drive containing all my recordings, then slipped out through the back door while they were still talking. The Cedar Grove Cafe was nearly empty when I arrived. Margaret sat in a corner booth, her silver hair elegant against her navy blazer. She watched me approach with shrewd eyes. "You look just like I did 30 years ago," she said as I sat down. Same determined expression. Same fear. "You knew this would happen?" She stirred her coffee slowly. "Evelyn has a pattern. She did the same thing to Connor's first girlfriend in college. The girl had a complete breakdown. Everyone blamed it on academic pressure, but I knew better." "Why didn't you say anything? Would anyone have believed me? Evelyn's very good at what she does." She leaned forward. "But you have something I didn't have back then. Proof." I pulled out the USB drive. "She's trying to get me committed. They want to take my baby." "Of course they do. That's her endgame. Total control. She'll raise your child as her do-over, and Connor will let her because he'll believe you're unstable." My hands shook as I reached for my water. "I need your help. What I'm about to tell you could destroy multiple lives, including Connor's faith in everything he believes about his mother." She met my eyes. "Are you sure you want that?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A text from Connor. "Where are you?" "Mom's worried. Dr. Chen is here for your evaluation." Another buzz. "Please come home. We can work this out." "They're trying to trap me," I whispered. Margaret reached across the table, her hand covering mine. "Listen carefully. 28 years ago, Evelyn had another son. She lost custody after—" She stopped as the cafe door chimed. Connor stood in the doorway, his face a mask of betrayal. Behind him, Evelyn emerged like a shadow. "I tracked your phone," he said flatly. Evelyn stepped forward, all concern and gentle smiles. "Darling, we're here to help you. Dr. Chen is waiting." I looked at Margaret, silently pleading. She straightened her spine, years of buried truth rising to the surface. "Tell them about David," Margaret said clearly. The color drained from Evelyn's face. "Margaret, don't." "David?" Connor turned to his mother. "Who's David?" I pressed record on my phone, watching as Evelyn's carefully constructed world began to crack. Sometimes revenge isn't about winning. It's about surviving long enough to expose the truth. And as Margaret opened her mouth to speak, I saw my chance for both. The name David hung in the air like smoke, choking us all. Connor's face had turned ashen, his lawyer's mind piecing together a puzzle he never knew existed. "He was your brother," Margaret said, her voice steady. "Born 6 years before you." Evelyn lunged forward, knocking over my water glass. "That's enough." "No," Connor said. "It's not nearly enough. What happened to him?" The cafe had emptied except for a nervous waitress hovering near the counter. My phone continued recording, capturing every trembling breath, every shifting glance. "Your mother lost custody," Margaret continued, ignoring Evelyn's warning glare. After I protected him." Evelyn's composure shattered. "He was sensitive like you, Connor. The world would have destroyed him. I had to make him stronger." Connor stepped back. "What did you do?" "The same thing she's planning for your child," I said quietly. "Control through isolation, manipulation through fear, until David broke." "He didn't break," Evelyn snapped. "He was weak, but I won't make the same mistake with your daughter. I'll do better this time." The pieces clicked into place. Her obsession with my pregnancy, her attempts to paint me as unstable, her need to control every aspect of our lives. History wasn't just repeating, it was being deliberately reconstructed. Connor turned to Margaret. "Where's he now?" "Dead," she replied. "Suicide, age 16, 6 months after the courts removed him from her care." The sound that escaped Evelyn wasn't human. She grabbed her purse and fled, leaving Connor standing there, his world imploding. "The psychiatric hold," he whispered. "The custody concerns. It was all a setup," I finished. "Just like with David." He reached for a chair, legs unsteady. "I almost let her— God, Paisley, We need to go," Margaret interrupted. "Evelyn won't stay gone long. She'll either come back with reinforcements or start destroying evidence," I realized. "The recordings, the documents." Connor's phone rang. Evelyn's number. He stared at it, then declined the call. "We need to get home, now." The drive back was tense, Connor's knuckles white on the steering wheel. I played him portions of the recordings, Evelyn's threats, her conversation with James about the deed, her plans for the baby. "Pull over," he suddenly demanded. I thought he was angry, but when he turned to me, his eyes were wet. "I'm so sorry. I should have seen it, should have protected you." "You're protecting us now," I said, placing his hand on my belly where our daughter kicked steadily. His phone buzzed again. A text from our neighbor. "Smoke coming from your house. Fire trucks on the way." We arrived to find 3 fire trucks in our driveway. Smoke poured from the upstairs windows, from our home office, where I kept the USB drive backups, where Connor stored our important documents. "She's burning everything," I whispered. But then we saw her, standing in the upstairs window, Margaret's revelations having pushed her past some final barrier of sanity. She held something in her hands, photos, maybe, or documents, feeding them one by one into the flames. "Mom!" Connor shouted. "Get out of there!" She looked down at us, her face eerily calm. "I protected him," she called. "I'll protect all of you." The firefighters were rushing in as Connor tried to follow. I grabbed his arm, another contraction hitting. Stronger this time, too early. "The baby," I gasped. "Something's wrong." As the paramedics loaded me into the ambulance, I watched smoke billow from our home. Evelyn stood at the window still, a dark silhouette against the flames, destroying the evidence of one life while I fought to bring another into the world. The last thing I heard before the ambulance doors closed was Connor's voice, torn between 2 emergencies. "Save them, please. Somebody save them." But I wasn't sure who he meant to save anymore, his wife and unborn child, or the mother who'd finally shown her true face. The hospital corridor blurred as another contraction hit. Through the haze of pain, I heard the chaos around me. Monitors beeping, nurses rushing, Connor's voice arguing with someone at the door. "She's not allowed in here," he was saying. "I don't care if she's family." "I have rights," Evelyn's voice carried down the hall. "That's my grandchild." I gripped the bed rails, the contractions coming faster now. The smoke smell still clung to my hair, a reminder of what we'd lost. Our home, our evidence, our sense of safety, all gone in flames. "Blood pressure's spiking," a nurse called out. "We need to get her stabilized." Through the window, I caught glimpses of the confrontation. Evelyn, her clothes still smelling of smoke, trying to push past Connor. Security guards approaching, Margaret standing between them like a barrier. "Your rights?" Connor's voice cracked. "Like your rights with David?" "Everything I did was for love," Evelyn screamed. "You don't understand what it takes to protect a child." Another contraction ripped through me, and the monitor's steady beeping turned erratic. The baby's heart rate was dropping. "We need to prep for emergency C-section," the doctor announced. "The cord might be compressed." Connor rushed to my side, his face pale. "I'm here. I'm not leaving you." "Sir, we need you to step out and change into scrubs if you want to be present." As he moved away, Evelyn slipped through the momentary gap in security. She reached my bedside, her eyes wild, her hands reaching for my belly. "I'll make it right this time," she whispered. "I'll show you all." The monitor screamed as my blood pressure spiked again. Nurses rushed forward, trying to remove her, but she clung to the bed rail. "You're killing them both," Connor shouted, pushing back into the room. "I'm saving them." Evelyn pulled something from her pocket, a syringe. "Just like I tried to save David." Everything happened at once. Security grabbed Evelyn as she lunged forward. The syringe clattered to the floor. My vision tunneled as the pain peaked. "What was in it?" the doctor demanded, examining the syringe. "What did she try to give her?" "The same thing I gave David," Evelyn said calmly. "To keep him close, to keep him safe." The last thing I saw was Connor's face crumpling as 2 police officers entered the room. Then darkness swept in, carrying with it the weight of all our failures. My failure to protect our home, Connor's failure to see the truth sooner, and somewhere in the past, a young boy named David who no one could save. I woke to the sound of machines and urgent voices. Baby's heart rate still dropping, mother's pressure unstable. "We need to move now." "Paisley," Connor's voice reached through the fog. "They need to put you under. The baby—" "Don't let her near our daughter," I managed to whisper. "Promise me." "I promise, but you have to promise to come back to us." As the anesthesia mask descended, I heard Margaret's voice from somewhere nearby. It ends here, Evelyn. No more children, no more chances. Then consciousness slipped away, and I was falling into a place where mothers became monsters, and love twisted into poison, and somewhere a 16-year-old boy named David waited to tell me his story. The last coherent thought I had was a question. If revenge had brought us here, what would salvation cost? The darkness took me before I could find the answer. I woke to the sound of my daughter crying. Through the post-surgical haze, I saw Connor holding her, his body angled protectively toward the door. Margaret stood guard like a sentinel, her silver hair catching the fluorescent light. "She's perfect," Connor whispered, bringing our daughter closer. "And you're going to be okay." But something in his voice was wrong, strained. Before I could ask, Margaret spoke. Evelyn escaped police custody during transport. The syringe contained sedatives, the same ones found in David's autopsy. The monitors beeped faster as my heart rate spiked. Connor pressed the baby closer to his chest. "She's in the hospital somewhere," he said. "Security's searching, but—" The door clicked shut behind us. We all turned to find Evelyn standing there, still in her smoke-stained clothes, holding something in her trembling hands. "David's baby book," she said, lifting the charred album. "I saved it from the fire. I saved everything important." Connor shifted toward the call button, but Evelyn raised her other hand. Another syringe. "Don't," she said softly. "I just want to explain. To make you understand." "Like you explained to David?" Margaret stepped forward. "Before or after you started drugging him?" "I protected him," Evelyn's voice cracked. "The world was too harsh, too cruel. He needed guidance, control, just like she does." Her eyes fixed on my daughter. "Mom," Connor's voice shook. "You killed him." "No, the foster family killed him. They let him run wild, let him think he could survive without me. I was making him stronger." I tried to sit up, ignoring the surgical pain. "By poisoning him? Small doses, just enough to keep him calm, manageable, safe." She opened the baby book and photographs spilled out. A young boy with Connor's eyes, growing progressively more vacant in each image. "See how peaceful he was? How protected?" "Protected?" Connor's voice rose. "He was 16 when he died." "Because they took him away. But I won't let them take her." She stepped toward the baby. "I know better now. The doses, the timing. I've learned so much." I caught Margaret's slight nod, saw her inch toward the door. We just needed to keep Evelyn talking. "Tell me about David," I said. "Tell me everything." Evelyn's face softened. "He was sensitive, like Connor, like your little girl will be. The world would have destroyed him, so I helped him. Every day, just a little medicine to keep him safe, to keep him mine. Until he fought back," Margaret said quietly. "He didn't understand." Evelyn clutched the baby book. "None of you understand. A mother's love has to be what?" Connor demanded. "Controlling, poisonous, fatal." "Perfect," she screamed. "It has to be perfect." She lunged forward, syringe raised, but Margaret was faster. She grabbed Evelyn's arm as security burst through the door. In the struggle, the baby book fell, scattering more photos. David's progression from bright-eyed child to hollow shell, his final school picture showing empty eyes and a vacant smile. As the guards restrained her, Evelyn kept screaming, I loved him perfectly." "No," Connor said, tears streaming down his face. "You loved your idea of him, your control over him, just like you loved your idea of me." They led her away, her screams echoing down the hall. The baby book lay open on the floor, its pages showing the gradual destruction of a child through a mother's twisted love. Connor brought our daughter to me, and I held her close, breathing in her newborn scent. In the doorway, Margaret watched us with tired eyes. "She'll be evaluated," she said quietly. "Charged. There's enough evidence now. The sedatives, David's case files, the recordings you made. She won't hurt anyone else." I looked down at my daughter, seeing in her face all the possibilities Evelyn had tried to control and destroy. "What was his real name?" I asked. "Before she changed it to David?" Margaret smiled sadly. "Connor. His name was Connor, too." My husband's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room as the full weight of Evelyn's madness finally settled around us like ashes from our burned home. The insurance adjuster called our house a total loss, but standing in the charred remains of our home office, I found something the flames hadn't claimed. Behind a fallen shelf, protected by its metal case, was a small lockbox I'd never seen before. "That's David's," Margaret said from the doorway. "Evelyn kept it after everything." Connor took the box with trembling hands. Inside lay a journal, its pages filled with a teenager's desperate scrawl, and beneath it, a letter addressed to my other brother. We sat in the temporary apartment's kitchen as Connor read aloud. "If you're reading this, it means she got to you too. But maybe you were stronger than me. Maybe you survived her love." My daughter slept against my chest as David's words filled the room, telling the story of a boy who knew he was dying by degrees, whose mother's perfect love was really perfect poison. "The doctors say the damage is permanent," Connor read, his voice breaking. "Even if I stop taking the medicine now, my organs are failing. But maybe you'll have a chance. Maybe you'll see her for what she is before she makes you disappear too." The final page held a photograph. David with a friend's family, smiling genuinely for the first time in any picture we'd seen of him. The date on the back was 3 days before his death. "He chose freedom," Margaret said softly, even knowing it would kill him. Connor set the journal down. "The court date is next week. They want me to testify." "Us," I corrected. "They want us both." He touched our daughter's tiny hand. We'd named her Hope, not for optimism, but for defiance. Hope in the face of darkness. Hope despite knowing how cruel love could become. "I found something else," Margaret said, pulling out an envelope. "Evelyn's psychiatric evaluation. There's a genetic component, a hereditary predisposition to—" "Stop." Connor's voice was firm. "We're not her. I'm not her." "No," I agreed. "You're David's brother, his real brother, and Hope's father." The doorbell rang. The contractor with renovation plans for our house. As Connor went to answer it, I looked down at Hope, seeing in her face none of Evelyn's sharp edges or desperate need for control. "We're keeping the journal," I told Margaret. "Not to remember the darkness, but to honor the light. The boy who chose freedom." She nodded, understanding. "And Evelyn?" "We'll never know her granddaughter. That's not revenge, it's protection." Connor returned with the plans, spreading them across the table. Our home would be rebuilt, different but stronger, like us. The contractor pointed to various features: reinforced windows, security systems, a nursery filled with light. But I was watching Connor trace the outline of what would be Hope's room, his fingers steady and sure. "We should frame this," he said suddenly, holding up the photo of David smiling. "In the nursery, so she knows where she comes from and what she was saved from." I thought of Evelyn in her hospital room, still claiming her love was perfect, still believing control was protection. The doctors said she'd never leave, her mind too fractured by the truth of what she'd done. Hope stirred against me, and I breathed in her sweet scent. In the end, revenge hadn't saved us. Truth had. A dead boy's journal, a brother's awakening, a mother's love turned to poison. "Look," Connor said, pointing to the plans. "The office window faces east now. Morning light. Morning light where evening shadows used to be." I touched the journal, thinking of David's final choice: freedom over survival. Sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes protection means stepping back. And sometimes, in the ashes of what was lost, we find something stronger than revenge. The courage to break cycles, to choose light over darkness, to love imperfectly but truly. Hope opened her eyes, reaching for her father's hand. In that gesture was everything Evelyn had tried to control and destroy: trust freely given, love without conditions, the future unbound by the past. We would rebuild, we would remember, and we would love differently. That would be our true revenge.